West Ham's meteoric rise since David Moyes took over in 2020 from 16th in the Premier League to 6th, 7th and winning the Europa Conference League has been nothing short of incredible, considering the club's stature. This has been primarily built on defensive solidity and grit at the back, with the Hammers conceding 47 and 51 goals in 2021 and 21-22, respectively, allowing them to punch far above their weight. Here, I'll be analysing what's made them so formidable by using examples from this season. 23-24 so far. After a blip in 22-23 due to a multitude of factors, Moyes' side have returned to form this season, sitting 7th on 13 points after 7 games, after a tough fixture list, including Brighton, Manchester City and Liverpool. In the process, they've put up superb defensive performances against Chelsea and Brighton. Despite losing defensive linchpin Declan Rice to Arsenal, the club reinvested the windfall superbly, with Edson Alvarez, James Ward-Prowse and Dinos Mavropanos, who have all hugely helped to shore up the defensive side of the team. Style of play. As is standard for Moyes, the Hammers have primarily operated a transition-heavy style, based off of winning possession from a mid/low block, and rapidly getting up the pitch through progressive passes or carries, hoping to catch out an opponent who has committed too many players forward. They have actually averaged the third least possession in the league so far, with 38.1% per match, proving that you don't have to keep the ball to win games. Now, I'll explain what makes them so hard to break down, and how Moyes uses his players to do so effectively. Block setup. This season, West Ham have typically played a 4-3 and 3/4 2-3-1 in possession, shifting to a 4-1-4-1 block out of possession, usually forcing the opponent out wide, where the Hammers can utilize their aerial superiority to win headers, and therefore neutralize any threat. The way they do this is by having Edson Alvarez screening in front of the defense, and picking up any pocket players between the lines, where he heavily limits central access through neutralizing players who could potentially break West Ham's structure, a method that worked especially well against the passmasters of Brighton. As the opponent gets closer to the box, the defensive shape usually gets narrower and more compact, almost exclusively resorting to pure box defending save for one of the front three, pressing the player in possession. As mentioned previously, this invites crosses that were dealt with fairly easily by Zammer and Agard, constantly rebuffing Brighton, and often setting the team off on the counter. However, this approach also opens up opportunities for long shots with little pressure, something that Brighton and Pascal Gross exploited for Brighton's only goal. This is not a major issue though, as Alphonse Areola's shot stopping has gone up several levels since being made first choice, with a PSXG Georgia of plus 0.45, placing him in the 99th percentile among goalkeepers. The role of the fullbacks in the system is especially important, with Paqueta drifting inside from the left, and Bowen staying up the pitch for a counter-attack, meaning that Emerson and Kufel are often isolated or doubled up on when defending in transition, usually tasked with slowing the wide players down, in order for the team to settle into a deep block. As a result, they often have to time their jumps onto the wingers perfectly to close them down, and minimize space to accelerate. As aforementioned, Emerson stays higher and wider, while Kufel somewhat tucks into the back four, with a heavy left side bias during build-up, meaning that the check is often targeted by opposing 1v1 wingers, by dribbling wide and drawing him out of the defensive line, as Jeremy Doku exploited. Such dribbling outliers like Doku are rare though, and it takes a very special fullback to not be troubled by him at all, so any worries about Kufel are minimal at worst, considering his superb form this season. Emerson is generally isolated less as one of Paqueta or Ward-Prowse comes to support him, almost forming a back five at times. As a result, any space for attackers is heavily compacted on his side, due to the apparent left-sided bias as discussed previously, meaning that solo dribbles, cutbacks to the edge of the box or switches to the right side, are often the only option, so his side tends to be quieter in that regard. Naif, Agard and Kurt Zouma are primarily tasked with mopping up long balls, and heading away anything that comes their way, with the Moroccan shouldering the majority of the ball-playing duties, and utilizing his recovery pace to deal with any balls in behind. With Kufel tucking into the back four and Alvarez screening them, central progression is very difficult, and can usually only be achieved through lighting quick combination play, or a perfectly weighted ball over the top, something that Agard struggles with as his communication with Areola tends to be poor. Pressing scheme. Contrary to most Premier League teams, West Ham hardly ever press the opposition's backline, instead remaining passive and not ceding any central space, or becoming vulnerable to long balls in behind. This worked especially well against Brighton, where their method of baiting the press was near neutralized with a simple mid-block, and allowed the Hammers to remain compact, and not get sliced through in typical Brighton fashion. In the 4-1-4-1 shape, Antonio is ready to pounce on any loose balls, while the two central midfielders mark Brighton's pivots, and the wingers are ready to jump onto Brighton's fullbacks. Once the ball reaches the second line, the Hammers begin to compact even further, usually with one of Ward-Prowse or Soucek pressing the central ball carrier, while Paqueta and Bowen drift in field to cut off any easy passing lanes to wide runners, as well as overloading the center. If those wide runners are found, usually one of the fullbacks, particularly Emerson, begin to press them while the whole team tilts to crowd the immediate area and attempt to force that player out of play, or having to pass backwards. Afterwards, the team continues to retreat as one block into their box, usually with one situation-dependent player pressing the ball carrier, forcing them to continually recycle the ball or take shots. However, Brighton and Chelsea were able to exploit this on occasion with quick combination play, by picking gaps between West Ham's defensive and midfield lines in the advanced half spaces, where only Alvarez was there to cover, and dangerous situations often arose from this interplay. Edson Alvarez's role is arguably the most important in the whole defensive structure, taking responsibility for the entire space between the defense and midfield, as well as picking up any players between the lines, and preventing them from turning and running at the centre-backs. He also stays back while the team are attacking, balancing Ward-Prowse and Soucek's tendencies to get forward, as well as covering space during transitions, and breaking up attacks almost before they start. A top replacement for Declan Rice's defensive prowess and leadership in the middle of the park, as well as being far better suited to the way Moyes wants to play. Conclusion. A robust defensive structure lays the foundation for any successful team, and West Ham are no different. Solidity and grit are the basic principles of Moyes' out-of-possession approach, and while some consider it backwards and anti-football, I completely disagree. There is no singular perfect style of play, and I thought it would be nice to highlight one of the less appreciated defensive methods, away from your typical high-pressing and rigid order of positional play. With the Hammers playing superbly as of late, there's no telling how far they'll go this season. One thing is for sure though, without such a superb defensive setup, they wouldn't be anywhere near where they are now.